A meeting among stars. Eric adjusted the strap of his helmet as the survey pod settled on a ridge of jagged ice. Beyond the ridge, the alien city sprawled out like a luminous labyrinth. Its crystalline towers reflected the weak starlight, bathing the frosted canyon in a faint, ethereal glow. "What do you think, Oliver?" Eric glanced over his shoulder at his colleague, who was fussing with a scanner. The two of them had worked together on enough exploratory missions to know that neither would be satisfied with just a surface-level inspection. Oliver tapped the screen, his gloved fingers slightly clumsy in the frigid air. "The readings are off the charts. It's not just geothermal activity down there. There's energy, strong, consistent energy. Could be machinery still running after all this time." Machinery. That's a nice way of saying this place isn't dead. Eric squinted through his visor at the structures. They had an almost organic quality. Smooth curves, intricate spires, and arches that seemed to defy gravity. The faint hum that emanated from the city wasn't mechanical. Exactly. Felt more like a pulse. "Well, if we find something worthwhile, maybe the folks back home will actually give us some decent funding next time," Oliver said, slinging the scanner over his shoulder. "I say we head in. See what's keeping the lights on." "Good idea." Eric turned back to the ramp and grabbed his pack. "Keep an eye on your oxygen levels. Don't want you passing out before we find anything interesting." Yeah, Mom," Oliver muttered, earning a smirk from Eric as they both stepped onto the frozen surface. Their boots crunched against the ice, each step echoing faintly in the silent canyon. The path led down into the heart of the alien metropolis, where faintly glowing markers lined what might have been streets long ago. The structures were colossal up close, dwarfing any human-made skyscraper Eric had ever seen. Ice and frost covered much of the city, but here and there, surfaces glinted like polished metal or smooth glass, untouched by time. Oliver took readings at intervals, occasionally mumbling something about energy spikes and stable power grids. After an hour of cautious exploration, they reached a massive archway that opened into a domed structure. Inside, the temperature was noticeably warmer. The air was thin, but breathable enough to warrant flipping open the helmet's air intakes. Eric tapped his communicator. "This must be the core of the city. Something's keeping the climate in here stable." Oliver pointed to a series of glowing panels embedded in the walls. "It's almost like a life support system. Not exactly what you'd expect from a place abandoned for however long it's been." As they moved deeper into the dome, the architecture grew even more intricate. Each wall seemed to tell a story through carvings and patterns. Eric paused in front of one particularly detailed panel. "These look like events. Maybe it's a history of their people." "Could be," Oliver said. "Or maybe it's just decoration. Either way, it's still active. That energy signature's strongest right through there." He gestured toward a set of doors that hummed faintly. The two of them approached cautiously. Eric's fingers hovered near the control panel, though it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. "Think it's safe to open?" Oliver leaned in, scanning the symbols. "Hard to say, but we didn't come all this way to stop at the front door. Try it." With a slight nudge, the doors slid apart, revealing a grand chamber bathed in soft golden light. And there, standing in the center, was a figure. Tall, elegant, and unmistakably alien. Her form was covered in shimmering, translucent fabric, and her eyes, large and otherworldly, regarded them with a mix of curiosity and caution. Eric instinctively raised his hands to show he meant no harm. Hello." The alien tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was melodic, each word carrying a weight of wisdom and weariness. "You are not the first to enter this place." "Not the first," Oliver repeated. "What happened to the others?" She regarded them for a long moment before answering. "They left. They could not comprehend what they found. Perhaps you will be different." Eric glanced at Oliver. "Well, that's not ominous at all." "We're here to learn," Eric said quickly, stepping forward. "We're explorers, scientists. We just want to understand this place." The alien's gaze lingered on him. You wish to understand what my people built, what they left behind. Very well. She turned and motioned for them to follow. Come, I will show you. Eric and Oliver exchanged a look, then fell into step behind her. As they walked deeper into the chamber, Eric couldn't help but feel that they had just crossed into a story far greater than anything they had imagined. And it was only the beginning. Shadows of the long past. Wait, so your people just left? Eric asked as they followed the alien down a corridor lined with glowing panels. The light shifted gently, casting soft golden hues on the intricate carvings that seemed to pulse faintly with life. What happened to them? The alien Erythza, she had introduced herself, didn't respond right away. Instead, she paused at one of the panels, her long, delicate fingers brushing over the surface. The images on it shimmered, reshaping into what looked like scenes of thriving cities, bustling marketplaces, and soaring ships leaving a world far greener than the icy expanse they now stood upon. Not all left willingly, Erythza said at last, her voice as melodic as before but tinged with something like sadness. Some departed in search of opportunity. Others were driven out by circumstances beyond their control. Oliver, walking a few steps behind, frowned. What kind of circumstances? Was it a natural disaster? War? Disease? Greed? She said simply. Ambition? Overreach? She gestured to another panel that displayed a vast assembly of beings, clearly her species, standing before what looked like a council. Our people grew powerful, but power without wisdom corrodes the spirit. Disputes became fractures, and fractures became exodus. Eric stepped closer, studying the images. So the city was abandoned because of internal conflict? That's it. Erythza turned to him, her large, luminescent eyes studying his face. You say that's it as if such things are minor. Perhaps to a race as young as yours, they seem so. But for us, the weight of those divisions spanned millennia. And by the time we realized the cost, it was too late. The great exodus had already begun. That's... Eric hesitated, searching for the right words. A lot to take in. Oliver nodded, his brow furrowed. I can't imagine leaving something like this behind. This city, it's incredible. All these lights, these carvings. Was it meant to be a monument to your people's achievements? Erythza smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. It was meant to be a refuge, a place where knowledge and culture could endure. Instead, it became a relic. Knowledge is power, though, Oliver pointed out. If all of this was preserved, it's not just a relic. It's a... He stopped himself, catching Eric's warning glance. It's something valuable. She tilted her head. You speak of value as if it is something measurable. Knowledge, culture. These are not treasures to be weighed. They are living things, meant to be shared and understood. Yet my people hid them away, and I was left to guard them. Eric's gaze shifted to her. So you've been here all this time? Alone? I was not always alone, Erythza said softly. There were others at first. Scholars, caretakers. But one by one they left. Some to join the exodus, some to find their own purpose. In the end, only I remained. The room fell silent for a moment. Eric and Oliver exchanged glances, neither quite sure what to say. Finally, Eric stepped closer to the panel. I can't imagine what that must have been like. Staying here, watching everything fade away. It was not what I had envisioned, Erythza admitted. She looked at him again, her gaze piercing. And yet now you are here, humans from another world entirely. Your arrival is unexpected. We didn't mean to intrude, Eric said quickly. We didn't know anyone was still here. We were just exploring, looking for signs of past civilizations. And now you have found them, she said, her voice gentle but firm. What will you do with what you have learned? Eric hesitated. He glanced at Oliver, then back at her. We don't know yet. We're still processing everything. But I'd like to understand more. To learn your story. Erythza studied him for a moment before nodding. Very well. I will show you more. But you must promise not to take what you learn and use it as my people once did. Knowledge without wisdom leads only to destruction. Eric nodded, his expression serious. We'll be careful. Oliver, shifting his pack on his shoulder, chimed in. Yeah, we'll make sure to actually think things through before running off and doing something dumb. Right, Eric? Right? Eric glanced at him. I mean, that's the idea. Eritza gave a soft, almost musical chuckle. Very well. Come with me. There is much to see, and much to understand. With that, she turned and led them further down the corridor. Eric and Oliver followed, both feeling the weight of what they were beginning to uncover, and the responsibility that came with it. Learning to dance in time, the chamber Eritza led them into was vast, almost incomprehensibly so, its vaulted ceilings stretching high above, interwoven with strands of light. Golden, violet, and blue hues flickered and flowed like an aurora. In the center of the room stood a large, circular platform etched with glowing lines. It hummed faintly, a constant, rhythmic pulse. This was the nexus, Eritza explained, her voice softer here, as if she was speaking in a temple. Our people gathered here to share knowledge, ideas, and art. It was more than a meeting place. It was a convergence of thought. Eric approached the platform, running a gloved hand along the intricate carvings that seemed to shift under his touch. It's beautiful, he said. And alive, almost. It is responsive, she replied. It reacts to those who engage with it. Shall I show you? Oliver, standing a few steps behind, raised an eyebrow. This thing isn't going to fry our circuits or anything, is it? Eritza tilted her head. Circuits? He means it won't hurt us, right? Eric said quickly, casting Oliver a sidelong glance. Just a precaution. It will not harm you, she reassured them. Its purpose is to connect, not to destroy. With a subtle motion, Eritza activated the platform. The lines brightened, shifting into flowing patterns that moved in sync with the chamber's rhythmic hum. A series of symbols appeared, hovering in the air, abstract shapes that seemed to flicker just out of true focus. It's like it's alive, Oliver muttered, stepping closer. Is it AI? Some kind of advanced intelligence? It is more than a machine, Eritza said. It is a medium, a way for us to express and understand what cannot be spoken. It will show you what you need to see. Eric glanced at her, intrigued. What do you mean by that? Eritza gestured toward the platform. Step onto it, and you will understand. Oliver hesitated. You sure we won't break it? You will not break it, she said with a faint smile. Go on. Eric took the first step, feeling the surface beneath him shift ever so slightly, as if it were adjusting to his weight. Oliver followed reluctantly, gripping his scanner tightly as if it were a lifeline. First, nothing happened. Then, slowly, shapes began to form in the air, glowing threads of light weaving together into intricate patterns. The chamber's hum deepened, resonating in their chests. What is this? Eric whispered. It feels familiar, but I don't recognize any of it. It is responding to your presence, Eritza said, stepping closer but remaining off the platform. Your thoughts, your feelings, they shape the patterns. Wait, Oliver said, holding up a hand. You're saying this thing is reading our minds? Not precisely, she said. It is resonating with you, reflecting your state of being. Eric stared at the shifting lights, mesmerized. It's incredible. It's like it knows what we're thinking before we even realize it. Eritza's gaze lingered on him. It does not know in the way you understand. It senses and it responds. In my culture, we often used it to communicate ideas that words could not convey. Art, emotion, even memory. These can be shared here. Oliver crossed his arms, still skeptical. So it's like a visual diary? An interactive museum? If you wish to think of it that way, she said, though her tone suggested it was so much more. But it is not just about recording. It is about connection. Eric turned toward her, stepping off the platform. What did you use it for? Eritza's eyes softened. For learning. for creating, for understanding one another. It was a way to bridge the distances between us, not just physically but emotionally. It was here that many of our greatest achievements were shared, and here that we faced our greatest challenges. Eric frowned slightly, considering her words. Do you still use it? I have not in a very long time, she admitted. There is no one left to share it with. Oliver glanced at Eric, then back at Eritza. Until now, I guess. Eritza inclined her head. Perhaps. Eric looked back at the glowing threads still weaving through the air. If this was so important to your people, why leave it behind? Why not bring it with you? It cannot be taken, she said simply. It is tied to this place. It is part of what we were, what we created together. To remove it would be to destroy what it represents. Oliver scratched the back of his head. Well, if it's not going anywhere, at least we can still learn from it, right? Eritza smiled faintly, a rare expression for her. Yes, you can. As the lights faded, the chamber's hum quieted, leaving only the faint echo of their voices. Eric and Oliver stepped away from the platform, both clearly moved by what they had experienced. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Eric glanced at Eritza. What's next? He asked. She regarded him thoughtfully. Next, I show you what lies beyond this chamber, and perhaps you will begin to understand the story of my people. Canyons of glass, touches of warmth. The tunnel stretched on, the walls shimmering faintly as though the light was trapped beneath layers of ice. Eric's flashlight cast shifting shadows across the alien carvings that lined the path. Symbols they couldn't read but couldn't stop looking at. Oliver tapped his scanner. Energy levels are dropping here. We might be getting further away from the main power source. So what happens if the lights go out? Eric asked, glancing at the walls. Do we just stumble our way back? Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Oliver muttered. I'd rather not die lost in an alien glacier. Eritza walked a few paces ahead of them, her figure cutting an elegant silhouette against the glowing walls. The energy does not fail here. It may weaken, but it never fades completely. Convenient, Oliver said. That's not how power usually works. It is not power in the sense you know it, she said, her tone calm but slightly teasing. But that is a conversation for another time. The tunnel began to widen, revealing a massive cavern filled with towering crystalline formations. Some reached so high they disappeared into the darkness above. Others were fractured, leaning against one another like toppled dominoes. The ground sparkled with a fine dust that crunched faintly underfoot. Whoa, Eric said, stopping short to take in the view. This is beautiful, Oliver finished, for once agreeing without sarcasm. These structures formed over millennia, Eritza explained, turning to face them. They grew as we expanded the city, resonating with the energy that sustains this place. They are as much a part of the city as its walls. Eric stepped closer to one of the towering formations, running a hand just above its surface. You said earlier that this city was built to preserve your people's knowledge. Were these crystals part of that? In a way, she replied. They are a natural consequence of what we created. But they also hold memories. Not recorded as you understand, but imprinted. Echoes of events, emotions, ideas. Oliver raised an eyebrow. So they're like an archive? A giant crystal data vault. Eritza smiled faintly. Not quite. You cannot extract information from them. But you can feel it if you know how to listen. Eric looked back at her, curiosity plain on his face. How do you listen? Through touch, she said simply. It is not something I can easily teach, but... She paused, considering. Place your hand on the surface. Eric hesitated, then pressed his palm against the crystal. The surface was cold, but not as icy as he expected. As he stood there, a subtle vibration ran through his hand, up his arm, and into his chest. It wasn't painful, more like a faint hum that made him acutely aware of his own heartbeat. Do you feel it? Eritza asked. I think so. He turned his head slightly, glancing at Oliver. It's like a pulse. Oliver frowned. I don't feel anything. You must approach it without expectation, she said. The crystals resonate with what you bring to them. If you are too analytical, she gestured toward Oliver, it may not respond. Oliver made a face. So, basically, I think too much. Perhaps, she said, her tone light, but that is not a flaw. It simply means you experience the crystals differently. Eric stepped back from the formation, shaking his hand out. That was strange. It felt like it was alive. In a way it is, Eritza replied. And it is unique to this city. Oliver stared at the crystals for a long moment before muttering, maybe I'll try it later. Eritza inclined her head. When you are ready. They continued through the cavern, the crystalline formations growing smaller as they moved on. The air grew warmer, which seemed impossible given the icy walls. Eventually, they came to a smaller chamber where the floor was smooth and the light softer, diffused through the walls like sunlight filtered through water. We will rest here, Eritza said, gesturing to the chamber's center. It is safe, and the energy here will sustain us. Sustain us how? Oliver asked. Is it like some kind of alien Wi-Fi that keeps you from getting tired? Eritza chuckled. A sound like a bell. Not quite. The energy here is subtle, but it helps maintain balance. You will find that fatigue fades more quickly. Eric dropped his pack and sat down, leaning against one of the low crystal formations. This place keeps getting stranger. Oliver followed suit, though he kept his scanner in hand. Stranger, but not in a bad way. Eritza sat across from them, her posture impossibly graceful. I imagine it must be overwhelming for you. I have lived with these wonders for so long that I forget how they might appear to new eyes. Overwhelming, yeah, Eric said. But also, incredible. This is the kind of thing people dream of discovering. Oliver glanced at him, smirking. So now you're the dreamy explorer type? I'm just saying it's not every day you find a city like this, Eric replied, then looked at Eritza. And someone. A bond they were forming made everything else. Space, time, and even the cold outside feel distant and unimportant. When worlds collide, they weren't alone. The first sign came in the form of a faint, rhythmic tapping echoing through the tunnels. At first, Oliver dismissed it as ice shifting. But as it grew louder, more deliberate, he glanced at Eric and raised a hand. Hear that? Eric nodded, frowning. It's not the city. It's something moving. Eritza turned to them, her normally calm expression shadowed with concern. You must stay close. This path connects to an area others occasionally traverse. Others? Eric asked. You mean beings who were once visitors, but now claim parts of this place as their own, she said. They are different from my kind, and they do not welcome strangers. Oliver muttered under his breath, clutching his scanner. Great, so we just walked into alien gang territory. Before Eritza could respond, a group of figures emerged from a side passage, their silhouettes tall and angular. Unlike Eritza's flowing, ethereal appearance, these beings were armored and sharp-edged, their movements precise and intimidating. They didn't speak at first, just stared, their glowing eyes fixed on the trio. Eric stepped forward cautiously, raising his hands. We mean no harm, we're just exploring. One of the figures finally spoke, its voice a low, metallic hum. This is not your territory, human. We didn't know it was anyone's territory, Eric said carefully. We're here to learn, not to take. The alien's gaze shifted to Eritza, its tone sharper now. You have brought outsiders here? Eritza's voice remained steady. They are not invaders. They seek understanding, nothing more. They should not be here, the alien replied. Your time has passed. This place belongs to those who remain. Oliver muttered to Eric. I don't think they're gonna just let us walk out. Not without talking first, Eric said under his breath. Then he addressed the alien directly. We're not looking to claim anything. We're just researchers, explorers. Whatever this place means to you, it's still a part of history, your history. Wouldn't you rather have it understood than forgotten? The alien tilted its head slightly, a motion that could have been curiosity or suspicion. Understanding will not undo what has been lost. No, but it can preserve it, Eric said. It can help others learn from it. Don't you want your story to be remembered? Aritza added quietly, he speaks the truth. If you turn them away now, you will ensure that no one outside the city will ever know what you fought for, what you kept alive. For a long, tense moment, the aliens didn't move. Then their leader shifted slightly, stepping closer to Eric. If you trespass further, we will not be so patient. Eric nodded. Understood. Without another word, the group of aliens turned and retreated down the passage they came from. The faint echoes of their footsteps lingered in the air until the chamber was silent once more. Oliver let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, that was intense. Aritza's shoulders relaxed slightly. They are protective of what remains. Their suspicion is understandable. Eric looked at her. They didn't attack. That's something. It is a sign that they were willing to listen, she said. And that is not nothing. Oliver shook his head. Still, we're gonna have to be careful. I don't want to have another run-in like that. Aritza gave him a faint smile. You have my word. I will guide you safely. As they resumed their path, Eric glanced back toward the tunnel where the aliens had disappeared. Do you think they'll come back? They will watch us, Aritza said. But as long as we do not provoke them, they will not interfere. Oliver snorted. Here's hoping you're right. Eric didn't reply. He focused on the path ahead, the faint glow of the city's architecture guiding their way. The encounter lingered in his mind, a reminder that the city wasn't just a relic of the past. It was still alive, still claimed by those who had chosen to stay. And for the first time, Eric realized their presence here wasn't just about uncovering secrets. It was about navigating a complex, living world, one that required understanding, patience, and a willingness to step carefully. Breaking the solitude. The group continued through the maze-like halls, their boots making a soft crunch against the thin layer of frost that coated the floors. Despite their earlier encounter, the atmosphere seemed lighter now. The glowing panels on the walls pulsed gently as they passed, as though welcoming them deeper into the heart of the city. Oliver looked down at his scanner and let out a low whistle. Still picking up strong readings. This whole place is humming with energy. It's like it's alive. It's always been like that, Aritza said, her tone thoughtful. Our city was built to reflect its inhabitants, to respond to their presence. Even when no one remained, it continued to breathe. Eric glanced at her. So it's more than just architecture. It's like an extension of your people. She nodded. In many ways, yes. We infused our essence into the city's design. It was meant to sustain us, not just physically, but spiritually. Oliver raised an eyebrow. Spiritual architecture. That's a new one. It's more than just bricks and mortar or crystals in this case, Eric said. It's like they created a living environment, something that could adapt and grow. Aritza smiled faintly. Exactly. You understand. They came to a large, open chamber with walls that shimmered like the surface of a calm lake. In the center stood a circular structure, not unlike the platform they had encountered earlier. But this one was different. It had seats arranged around its edge, and the air felt warmer, almost comforting. This was a gathering place, Aritza said. My people met here to share knowledge, to connect. It was a place of communion. Eric walked slowly around the edge, his hand brushing the smooth surface of the seats. It must have been amazing to sit here, to be part of that. Aritza's expression softened. It was. But as the city grew emptier, these gatherings became fewer. Until one day, they stopped entirely. Oliver folded his arms. So this is where it all started to fall apart? Not exactly, Aritza replied. It was not the beginning of the end, but the end of the beginning. This place represents a time when we still believed in unity, when we still trusted one another. Losing that, it was a gradual process. Eric stopped and turned to face her. What made you stay? I mean, if everyone else was leaving, why didn't you? I stayed because someone had to, she said simply. This city is more than stone and crystal. It's a part of who we were. I couldn't abandon it. But you were alone, Eric said. For so long. Yes, she admitted. But now, I am not. Oliver smirked. Yeah, lucky you got two humans stumbling around in here. Real upgrade. Eritza gave a small, melodic laugh. You underestimate yourselves. You have brought something back to this place that it hasn't seen in a very long time. Curiosity. A desire to understand. Eric stepped closer to her, his expression earnest. We're not just here to study it. We want to know it. To connect with it the way your people did. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze steady. That is a rare quality. And one that this city needs. Oliver cleared his throat. Okay, great. We're the chosen ones or whatever. Can we keep moving before something else pops out at us? Eric shot him a look. Always the optimist, huh? Hey, someone's got to be realistic, Oliver said with a shrug. Just saying, this place still gives me the creeps. Even if it's pretty. Eritza motioned toward another doorway. There is more to see. Follow me. As they passed into another corridor, the walls grew brighter, their light dancing in gentle waves. Eric walked beside Eritza, his voice low. You said the city reflects its inhabitants. Do you think it's responding to us now? It's possible, she said. It is not a conscious reaction, but rather a reflection of the energy you bring. That's kind of incredible, Eric said. It's like the city is alive in a way. It is, Eritza replied. But it needs more than just life. It needs connection. Eric glanced at her, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. Maybe we can help with that. Her expression softened, and she gave a small nod. Perhaps you can. Oliver, a few steps ahead, turned and waved his scanner. Come on, you two. We've got more ground to cover. Eric shook his head, chuckling under his breath. Never a dull moment. As they continued forward, the chamber's glow seemed to brighten slightly, as if the city itself had heard their words. For the first time in what felt like centuries, the ancient halls were alive not just with light, but with voices, and a shared determination to understand what had been lost, and what could be found again. Gifts of fragile beauty. The pathway spiraled upward, illuminated by a soft glow that seemed to originate from within the walls themselves. Eric and Oliver trudged along behind Eritza, whose graceful movements made the climb look effortless. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the city, if there even was a heart, in a place that felt endless. I swear, every corner of this place is more impressive than the last, Oliver said, pausing to catch his breath. He ran his hand along the smooth surface of the wall, the material cool to the touch. How do you even keep it all so pristine? Eritza glanced over her shoulder. The city maintains itself in a way. The energy that flows through these walls prevents decay. It was one of our earliest achievements. Eric, standing nearby, studied the faint, swirling patterns beneath his fingertips. It's not just the technology, though. There's an artistry to it, like you wanted it to be beautiful as well as functional. She nodded. Beauty and function were never separate to my people. What we built had to serve the spirit as well as the body. Oliver grinned, leaning against the wall. Now that's a concept I can get behind. My apartment back home could use some of this self-maintaining beauty. Maybe you should hire them as your interior decorators, Eric joked, earning a smirk from Oliver. Eritza smiled faintly, then continued up the path. The conversation lightened the air around them, making the daunting architecture feel a bit less imposing. After what felt like hours of climbing, they reached a vast, open chamber with a translucent ceiling that displayed the icy sky above. In the center stood a crystalline structure, almost like an enormous flower blooming in the middle of the room. What's this? Eric asked, stepping closer. Eritza's expression softened. This is a place of exchange. It was where we would share our creations, artifacts, music, poetry. We would leave pieces of ourselves here, and in return, the city would give us something of its own. Oliver tilted his head. What kind of things would it give you? Crystals like these, she said, gesturing to the delicate shards that jutted out from the central structure. Each one was unique, shaped by the energy and intent of the individual who stood before it. It was a gift, a reflection of their inner self. Eric ran his fingers along the edge of a nearby crystal. So, it's like the city was responding to what people felt? Exactly, Eritha replied. It was a dialogue silent, but deeply meaningful. Oliver raised an eyebrow. A city that talks back. That's new. Eritha gave a soft laugh. It doesn't speak in words, but in the language of creation. When you approach it with intent, it offers you something in return. Eric stared at the crystals, a thought forming in his mind. Can we try it? Eritha's eyes flickered with surprise, but she nodded. You may. Step forward and focus your thoughts. The city will do the rest. Eric approached the central structure, feeling a subtle warmth emanating from it. He closed his eyes, his hands resting lightly on the surface. He thought of the journey they'd taken to reach this place, the wonders they'd seen, and the connections they'd made. A soft hum filled the chamber, and when he opened his eyes, a small, intricate crystal had formed before him. It worked, he said, holding it up. The crystal shimmered in his palm, its shape reminiscent of a star. Oliver watched, skeptical but intrigued. That's pretty cool. What do you do with it now? Eritha smiled. You keep it. It is a part of you. Eric turned the crystal over in his hand. And what if I gave it to someone else? Her expression softened further. That would be a gift of the highest meaning. You would be sharing something deeply personal. Eric glanced at her, then back at the crystal. Maybe that's what this place is really about. Not just preserving knowledge, but giving it to each other, to anyone who comes here. Eritha tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. Perhaps you understand more than you realize. Oliver stepped closer, examining the crystal in Eric's hand. Looks like you've got yourself a souvenir. Let's hope you don't have to go through customs with that thing. Eric chuckled, slipping the crystal into a small pouch on his belt. Maybe it's not just a souvenir. Maybe it's a reminder of why we're here. As they turned to leave the chamber, Eric glanced at Eritha one last time. Thank you for showing us this. She inclined her head. Thank you for being willing to see it. Her heart reborn. They stood on a narrow bridge that spanned a vast chasm, the crystalline city stretching endlessly behind them. Ahead, the path sloped upward toward what appeared to be the highest point in the entire metropolis. The sky above was a riot of colors, the ice cliffs refracting light into shimmering hues that seemed almost alive. The sight was breathtaking even after all they'd seen. I have taken you as far as I can, Eritha said softly, her voice carrying over the faint hum of the city's energy. She turned to Eric and Oliver, her expression a mixture of sadness and something else, something closer to peace. From here, you must decide how you will carry what you've learned. Eric took a step closer, his gaze fixed on her. We came here to learn, to understand. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. You've seen more than most ever will, she said. And you have shown me something I did not expect to see again. What's that? Oliver asked, leaning against the bridge's railing. Connection, she replied simply. You've reminded me that even after all this time, I am not so alone as I believed. Eric glanced at Oliver, then back at Eritha. You don't have to stay here by yourself. We can find a way to bring people back, to keep this place alive. Eritha smiled faintly, though her luminous eyes betrayed a hint of emotion she rarely showed. It is not my place to decide what the future holds. I am the past, a guardian of what was. But you, both of you, are the present. And the present is where change begins. Oliver scratched the back of his head. So what, you want us to be ambassadors or something? Take your story back to the rest of humanity. Not just my story, Eritha said. Your own too. This city has changed you whether you realize it or not. That change will shape what you do next. Eric stepped forward, his expression serious. I don't know exactly what comes next, but I do know this. I want to make sure people understand what we've found here. Not just the technology, but the meaning behind it. Erytha inclined her head. That is all I could ask. For a moment, they stood in silence, the hum of the city the only sound. Then Oliver broke the quiet. You're really not coming with us? Erytha's smile returned, soft and genuine. This city is a part of me. I cannot leave it, just as it cannot leave me. But you will carry a piece of it with you. Eric hesitated, then reached into his pouch and withdrew the small crystal he had received earlier. If we're carrying a piece of it, then I think you should carry a piece of us, too. He extended the crystal toward her. Erytha looked at it, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she reached out and took it. The crystal glowed faintly in her hands, its light reflecting in her eyes. Thank you, she said softly. Oliver smirked. Yeah, consider it a human souvenir. Just don't sell it on alien eBay or anything. Eric chuckled, shaking his head. I'm not sure that's how it works, Oliver. Erytha gave a rare laugh, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to fill the air. Your humor is different from what I knew, but I think I will miss it. Well, don't get too emotional, Oliver said, though there was no malice in his voice. You've got your city and we've got a ship that's probably on its last leg. We'll see who ends up better off. Hopefully, you will both find what you are looking for, Erytha said. Whatever that may be. Eric nodded. We'll do our best. They turned to leave, walking slowly across the bridge toward the distant entrance where their ship awaited. The city's glow seemed to dim slightly, as if it were acknowledging their departure. As they reached the far end, Eric glanced back one last time. Erytha stood there, the crystal still in her hands, watching them go. Her silhouette was framed by the vibrant light of the city, a figure at once solitary and connected. Eric raised a hand in farewell, and she returned the gesture, her movements graceful and deliberate. As they stepped onto the path that would lead them out of the city, Oliver looked over at Eric. So what now? Now, Eric said, his voice steady. We share what we've found, and maybe, just maybe, we'll figure out what it all means.